Well, hi everyone, welcome to Compass Roanoke. My name's Josh, and I'm so glad you're with us today, whether you're in person or a part of Compass at home. And I gotta be honest with you, I want you to pray for me, real vulnerable right off the top here. I need prayer about how I feel about the person who made spring forward on spring break. I don't feel like Jesus would feel about that person. Anyways, so glad you're here. If you're brand new and you're kind of wondering what this whole unstoppable thing is, you can go to compass.church/unstoppable. It's just kind of the vision that we feel like God's put on our heart as a church. Maybe you're not aware, but we're one church in many locations. And we just believe God's put a huge vision in our heart for the next couple of years. Maybe if you're a part of Compass, you weren't here last week, or haven't been around, maybe been on vacation for a couple of weeks, you can still jump in and be a part of the Unstoppable Commitment. You can fill out that Unstoppable Commitment card in your seat and drop it in the offering generosity baskets, or whatever those things are called, on the way out the door. Or you can text Unstoppable to 94000 to make your commitment and be a part of Unstoppable with us. Hey, really cool thing happened last week that I just want to make you guys aware of. God's doing a lot of cool things in our church, but last week at the 10 o'clock service, this service, I went to our Next Steps room, which is kind of on the way out if you're new, to the left as you're walking out. It's where you go if you want to meet us, if it's your first time or you're relatively new, want more information about the church. And last week in Next Steps, after the 10 o'clock service, I met 9 first-time families in one service. And I thought that was really cool, but I was thinking about that, and I thought, man, there's probably a lot of people that are wondering, how do I get connected at Compass? How do I find my place? How do I learn about what you believe? How do I take my next step spiritually? You know, whether you're here and you're kind of kicking the tires on the Jesus thing, or you're here and you've been a Christian your whole life, but you're like, I want to be connected to this church and not just go here, but make it my church. Starting point is where you do that. Whatever your next step is spiritually, whether it's got to do with Compass or it's got to do with just you and Jesus, starting point is the place to do that. Starting April 11th at our 10 o'clock service, going to happen every week. There'll be childcare. It's going to be great. Starting point, compass.church/starting point is how you're involved with that and get connected. Okay, we're in a new series called The 3 Questions, starting today, 3 questions everyone has about God. And I think it's a really great lead up to Easter, which is crazy. It's just right around the corner, April 3rd and 4th, like Jasmine was talking about earlier. But I want you to do me a favor. I want you to start praying now about who you're going to invite with you to Easter, because here's what the stats tell us. All right, all the church nerds out there did do all these surveys. And about 10 years ago, a company called Barna surveyed around 10,000 adults. And most of them they tried to kind of find people who don't go to church regularly. And 83% of those 10,000 people said that if a friend invited them to church, they'd probably go with them, which is wild to think about, right? And so especially on Easter and Christmas Eve and Mother's Day, you got to go to church. If mom makes you go, you got to go. You know, you don't want to, fear God, fear mom, kind of same thing. But April 3rd, 4th, be praying about who you're going to invite, because it's going to be powerful. We're celebrating resurrection, but also the last week of this month, March 28th, and Easter weekend, we're going to have baptisms. And so if you've not yet been baptized, you're a follower of Jesus, but you've not gone public with that and kind of told the world, you can get baptized on March 28th on celebration weekend for Unstoppable, or on Easter. And how cool would that be to get baptized, signifying like your personal spiritual resurrection on the day that we celebrate Jesus' resurrection? Jesus might just come back when you're going down in the water. It's kind of like stars align kind of thing. But you can do that. You can text the word decision, RO, to 94000 if you want to get baptized on March 28th or April 3rd or 4th. That's a lot of stuff, okay? A lot of information. But here's this week's question. Big question, maybe the most important question that you answer really in your whole life, and that's this: what's God like? You ever thought about that? You ever thought about maybe what's God like? Like, we've asked the question, who's God? Is there a God? But when you ask this question, it makes it a little more personal, right? Like, let's assume there's a God, all right? And I'm not, right now in this moment, I'm not trying to make a case for either or. Let's just assume, though, that there is a God. What's he like? What is this God like? A very, very, very important question. In 1977, 49-year-old German brewer Erwin Kruse blew his life savings on his first flight, a once-in-a-lifetime birthday trip to San Francisco. He'd seen it on TV, and he wanted to visit the Wild West. As the World Airways flight from Frankfurt stopped to fuel in a small airport in Bangor, Maine, before continuing to California, An airline employee who finished her shift told Mr. Cruz, "Have a nice time in San Francisco." Her choice words changed his whole life. Cruz, who was typically enjoyed drinking 17 beers a day, was a little groggy at this point, and on hearing this, grabbed his suitcase, got off the plane, went through customs, jumped a cab, and asked the driver to take him into the city. He wandered Bangor, Maine for 3 days, enjoying the sights and sounds of all the city had to offer. Unfortunately, Mr. Cruz thought he was in San Francisco. Within a week, Cruz became an international celebrity. He made the Today Show and Time Magazine and was handed the key to San Francisco. He became a folk hero, and because he was the world's last lost tourist. His trip in October 1977 was a big one, and Cruz was understandably eager to see the famous hilly city from the glossy travel magazine with his own eyes. Once Cruz got through customs at that little airport, he was certain he was in San Francisco and didn't stop believing it for 3 very strange days. After much wandering, Cruz decided he must be in some Bay Area suburb, so he hailed a taxi and asked the driver to take him to downtown San Francisco. The driver sped away and thought this man must be crazy. Cruz returned to a familiar place, the bar. Suddenly, a little unsure of himself, he tried to get some help from a waitress. The language barrier was so wide, and she put him in contact with a neighbor named Gertrude Roman, a Czechoslovakian immigrant who spoke German. "It was so funny," recalled Roman, who was the first to make Cruz aware of his monumental error. He couldn't speak English. He didn't know anyone. He knew there were hills around San Francisco, and when he saw the hills around Bangor, he thought he was in the right area. The San Francisco Examiner ended up footing the bill for Cruz to extend his vacation and eventually head out west. When there, he was treated like a visiting dignitary. He met Mayor George Moscone for half an hour before the mayor met with Prince Charles. It was Moscone from whom Cruz told about his 17 beers a day diet, to which the alleged heavy drinking mayor replied, "Well, he beats me by a couple." On his whirlwind tour of the city, Cruz took a cable car, was piled with gifts, and even 3 marriage proposals. He even became a honorary member of the Wang Family Association at the Empress of China restaurant in Chinatown. Cruz also did most of the activities that you can do in San Francisco. He even attended a rodeo at the Cow Palace. There he was given a white cowboy hat to complement the headdress he was given from a Native American tribe in Maine. Eventually, he got a standing ovation in the middle of the rodeo ring. The roly-poly Cruz was welcomed to the city by Mayor Moscone, who presented him with the key to the city and a proclamation declaring that San Francisco does, in fact, exist. Though, as Time magazine wrote, the ruddy-faced bachelor did get to see the Golden Gate, but by all accounts, he left his heart in downtown Bangor, Maine. Is it possible to be in one place and really believe you're in the right place? And really believe, it looks like where you thought you were going to be. There's hills, similar terrain. Is it possible your whole life spiritually to be in Bangor, Maine, thinking you're in San Francisco? Is it possible your whole life to live serving, believing in, wrestling with a little g God, thinking that this God is really what God's actually like? What if what you think about when you think about God is right-ish? The saddest thing, I think, in all of human existence could be to climb the proverbial ladder up the wall of success only to get to the very end of life. You strive to do all that life could offer. You climb the ladder. It's arduous. You fall. You get back up. You climb the ladder. You get to the very top at the end of life, and on your deathbed, you realize that ladder was leaned up against the wrong wall. Is it possible to serve A fake God, a false God, not the real God, assuming and thinking the whole time that you are actually in San Francisco when you're really in Bangor. I love Pillsbury drop-and-bake chocolate chip cookies. Can I get an amen? I love them so much. And my wife and her sister, about 10 years ago, we were having a bunch of friends over for dinner. And doesn't that sound nice, having a bunch of friends over for dinner? Anyways, we were having a bunch of friends over for dinner, and they went and bought the groceries before, and we were going to cook and everything. And they bought all of the Pillsbury drop-and-bake cookies that they had, because there had a lot of people come over. But they didn't quite have enough. So they bought one extra pack of cookies that was the Great Value brand from Walmart. And they thought they could just put them in, and hide them in amongst the others, and that nobody would notice, especially me, with my fond affection for Pillsbury drop-and-bake cookies. And so they put them in the oven, and they bring them out after dinner, and that smell, right? I think heaven's going to smell like that, and we're all going to speak Spanish. My assumption, but anyways. I love Spanish. It's beautiful, and I love cookies. That's my heaven. What's yours? I don't know. Talk amongst yourselves. Okay. So they bring out the cookies, and they set them on the table, and they go in the kitchen in there, and they're kind of cleaning up. And I grab the first cookie on top of the plate, and I take a bite of the cookie, and I go, hey, wait a minute. There's something wrong with these cookies. Because I've always had an innate ability to spot a fake. I've always had an innate ability to spot an imposter. But sometimes when we're talking about God and we're talking about spirituality, it's not as easy as just which is the real cookie and which is the fake one. For some of us, there are certain things about God, theism, and Christianity that are a little unsettling. For many of us, though, on the other hand, there are things about the universe being reduced to simply the laws of physics, chemistry, and biology, kind of a godless space. For many of us, that's kind of unsettling too. There's a growing percentage of people in our society that feel spiritually homeless. And this is not new. People all throughout history have been disbelieving or walking away from a belief in gods. Once upon a time, the most sophisticated civilization in the whole world worshiped the sun. Once upon a time, the most sophisticated civilization in the whole world worshiped a god named Zeus. In the Roman Empire, they worshiped Jupiter. People quit believing in gods all the time. I love what Richard Dawkins says. Richard Dawkins is kind of an author, blogger, scholar. He's kind of one of the leading voices in what's called the modern atheist movement. He said this. He says, we're all atheists about most of the gods that humanity has ever believed in. Some of us just go one God further. You ever think about that? Thousands of gods have been worshiped all throughout history, and most of them you don't believe in. Most of them you would be considered an atheist toward. Current modern day atheists just choose to go one God further. Did you know that early Christians were called atheists by their culture? Why? Well, because they didn't believe in the pantheon of Roman gods. They didn't believe in Jupiter or Mars. They didn't embrace a deified Caesar. And so to society, the early Christians were called atheists. The early Christians didn't browbeat with theology. They didn't stand on the corner and preach turn and burn messages. The early Christians weren't harsh or, they didn't tell people, all the bad things that were going to happen to them. No, they had one message, and it was really clear. To those who worship Zeus, to those who worship Jupiter and Mars, to those who place the title of God on Caesar himself, the early Christians had one message. You've got the wrong God. You're right in worshiping God, but what you have is the wrong one. You think you're in San Francisco, but where you really are is Bangor, Maine, and I've been to both, and they're both beautiful, but Bangor, Maine is no San Francisco. If you're from Bangor, I am so sorry for insulting your heritage, but you've got the wrong God. I have never heard a deconversion story, someone who walked away from God because of God himself. I've never heard anybody say these words. You know what the problem with Christianity is? Jesus. I just can't stand him. I don't like Jesus. Never heard anybody say that. Most of the time when people walk away from God, they walk away from an experience they had, a thought they had, a question they had that didn't get answered. Most of the time when people walk away from God, they walk away from an unmet expectation. God was supposed to be something, and he ended up being something else. But here's the obvious question. Who told you that God was supposed to be that something that you walked away from? Who told you that God was like that thing that you have a hard time believing in? Where did you get the picture of God that you have a hard time placing your trust in? Maybe you had the wrong God. So for a lot of us, Christian deconversion, a lot of people, Christian deconversion look like this. You grew up in a religious environment. You transitioned to an irreligious environment that you like. College, new relationship, new marriage, boyfriend, girlfriend. You liked it a lot. Because this religious environment you grew up in had a lot of fences and a lot of constraints and a lot of rules and a lot of thou shalt nots. And you wrestled with a lot of those rules and you pushed up against a lot of those fences. And finally you got into an irreligious environment, workspace, or college, whatever. And it was freeing and it was liberating and you liked it a lot. And then you began asking adult questions about your childhood faith. And in response, you got faith-based answers to fact-based questions. And it didn't reconcile. You couldn't reconcile the faith-based answers you were getting with your adult experience, your adult questions. And the God of your childhood made no sense in light of your now adult life. And as one author wrote, one day it dawned on me, I didn't believe anymore. It just kind of happened. You just woke up and found you're just driving the car one day, or you're just getting coffee at Starbucks and you just had this thought like, I just don't buy it anymore. I'm not there anymore. For some of you, something happened in your life. Your Christian deconversion looked like this. You grew up in a religious environment. You experienced a childhood conversion. And then you experienced a faith-crushing event. Something happened to you, something happened around you, something happened in your church, something happened with some Christian leaders who you trusted, something happened with a person, a group of people. You got a divorce, you lost a job, you lost a spouse, you lost a kid. Faith-crushing event. You began asking adult questions about your childhood faith. And you got faith-based answers to your fact-based questions. And for you, as one blogger wrote, one day it dawned on me that I couldn't believe anymore. In light of what I've seen, in light of what I've experienced, in light of what I've walked through, in light of what happened, in light of how they abused power, in light of how she treated me, in light of what happened to me, I just can't believe anymore. You couldn't reconcile the God of your reality, the God of your childhood, with the reality of your life. You couldn't reconcile who you were told God was with what you've seen, what you've experienced, what you've heard, and you just couldn't believe anymore. For some of you, it's kind of a hybrid of sorts. For some of you, religious environment, childhood conversion, and you just started asking questions. And your parents couldn't answer your questions, and your pastor couldn't answer your questions. And you just kind of thought your way out of this whole God thing. Most Christian deconversion stories have two things in common. Number one, a somebody told me so God. And number two, a Bible tells me so Jesus. So today what I want to do is I want to zoom in onto a somebody told me so God. Because what's God like is often a question that we're taught the answer to at a very young age, and we end up not being able to reconcile someone else's definition of what God's like with our own reality. And a somebody told me so God often is the God that we end up walking away from as our life matures. I love what Karen Armstrong said in The Case for God. She says this: many of us have been left stranded with an incoherent concept of God. We learned a lot about God. We learned about God at the same time we learned about Santa Claus. But while our understanding of the Santa Claus phenomenon evolved and matured, our theology remained somewhat infantile. Not surprisingly, when we attained intellectual maturity, many of us rejected the God we had inherited and denied that he existed. To some degree, this is kind of all of our experience. So let's talk about it for a moment. Let's talk about the childhood gods that we grew up with. maybe the gods that we should walk away from. Maybe the gods that we should be atheist about. For some of you, this is going to be super encouraging because you're going to learn by the end of our time in the next 15 minutes or so that the gods you walked away from wasn't even God, wasn't actually God. That it was a somebody told you at some point in your life version of who God really is. And what you're going to learn is that the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, the God of the New Testament and the Old Testament, is a much better God than the God that you have a hard time believing in. So let's look at some of these gods that we walk away from. Number one, the bodyguard God. Not like Kevin Costner, Whitney Houston, different kind of bodyguard. The bodyguard God. Here's the bodyguard God. The bodyguard God is the God who never allows bad things to happen to good people. That's the bodyguard God. Do you know that no one's ever made this argument? No one. I've never heard anybody when they're trying to make an argument for the existence of God make this argument. A good God would not allow bad things to happen to good people. Since bad things never happen to good people, there must be a good God. Nobody's ever made that case. A good God would not allow bad things to happen to good people. And since bad things never happen to good people, there must be a good God. Nobody makes this case because bad things happen to good people all the time. So when we turn that statement around and say there's no God because bad things happen to good people, the assumption there is that at some point somebody told you that God claimed he would never let bad things happen to good people. And therefore, your argument for or against God is based upon the assumption that bad things are never going to happen to good people, and then you're a good person, or your grandpa's a good person, or your mom's a good person, and bad things happen to her. Therefore, God must not be real. But God never made that claim. God never made the claim that he would keep all bad things happening from good people. In fact, Christianity is founded on the events of the cross in which a terrible thing happened to the best person that ever lived. In fact, all the best people in the early church were treated terribly by the Roman Empire. This thought of God keeps bad things happening from good people never came from God himself. And so if you lost faith in the bodyguard God because you can't reconcile why your mom or your brother or your spouse or your kid or your cousin or even you had to go through what you went through, the bodyguard God does not exist. I think if you grew up thinking that bad things would never happen to good people and that God will always keep people from experiencing bad things, I think you had the wrong God, because I don't see God making that claim for himself. Number two, the on-demand God, Americans' favorite one. The on-demand God. And this is the God who responds to fair and selfless requests like I would. I'm not asking you to change the world, God. I'm just asking you to at least do for me what I would do for someone else. I would give somebody the job that they want. God, I would help somebody who was struggling financially if I could. God, so I'm asking you to do that for me. And so when you ask for the job and you pray for the job and you believe for the job and then you don't get the job, where's God? When you're struggling financially and the struggle continues, if the on-demand God is the God of your childhood, it doesn't reconcile with the experiences of your adult life. You asked for an answer, a sign, and a miracle, and you heard nothing, you saw nothing, you received nothing, so you just stopped believing. But here's the good news. You are right to stop believing in the on-demand God because there's no such thing as the on-demand God. Here's the question. Who told you that God always responds the way you expect? Where did that belief come from? That's a somebody told you so God. If this God did exist, most of our lives would be a train wreck because we'd be married to our 6th grade boyfriends and girlfriends who are now crazy. If this happened, if this God was true, the Cowboys would have like 87 Super Bowl trophies. This God does not exist, and if you walked away from this God, you walked away for good purpose. The next one, the boyfriend, girlfriend God. This is a God whose presence is always felt. You can always kind of sense his nearness. You always get goosebumps. You always kind of have warm fuzzies. Everything, you say the words a lot. I just sense God. I feel God. God's near. God's close. And I don't deny that one single bit. But since when was God a feeling? Since when was God goosebumps? I get goosebumps at a Coldplay concert, right? Since I don't feel him, then he must not be present. So we just walk away. Did you ever think about this? We are the least aware of the things that are most consistent in our life. Nobody walks into a room and sits down and looks at their friend and says, man, the temperature in here is perfect. You only do that when it's high or when it's low. But when it's right where it needs to be, you don't even notice it. So this whole God's got to be a feeling, and I got to always feel him, and he's always got to be present. And if I don't, here's where that leads. It leads to when you don't feel him, you either wonder, was he even real at all? Or you wonder, what did I do to make the feeling go away? And that Mother Teresa said herself that she went many years without feeling a thing from God. So maybe if you walked away from the boyfriend God or the girlfriend God, maybe he deserved to be kicked to the curb and dumped to the left, to the left. All right. The next one is one that we run from the quickest, but we can't get away from. Very few people are really able to stop believing in this God. In fact, I asked the question this past week on Facebook. I asked, what's something you believed about God that you no longer believe anymore? I got around 72 responses. The overwhelming majority of them were that God was mad at them. Was that God was punishing them. Was that if they did something wrong, God would strike them down. Was that God didn't want good things for them, but he wanted good things for other people. The majority of the responses had to do with the guilt God. The God who controls people through guilt and fear. The God who, if you ask the question, can I do this? He asks, is it fun? You say yes. His answer is no. You say, God, can I do this? He says, is it sexual? You say yes. He says, no, no, no. This is the God who loves you, but doesn't like you. Some of you have been successful at getting out of the environment that worships the guilt God, but you can't get away from the guilt God. And you bring him into work, and you bring him into school, and you bring him into your relationships and into your marriage. You bring him into how you parent. You bring him into how you do traffic. Man, you bring him into every single area of your life, and there's this kind of latent sense of shame and this latent sense of fear. You think that you just can't get away from your past, but deep down inside of you, you really are running from the guilt God. The shame, the disgrace that you feel. You think you're running away from an event, but what you're trying to do is to run away from a childhood God. Here's the question. Who told you that God was like that? Who told you that that's who God is? Maybe you have the wrong God. The next one. The anti-science God. This is the God who requires you to leave undeniable science for an unreliable religion. The God who requires you to leave an undeniable science for an unreliable religion. And you said it, you said to yourself, I can't ignore what's undeniable and embrace what's unreliable. And when religion and science conflict, I must go with science. Because science is what I can see and religion's what I can't. And if I'm honest, I'm more all in on what I can see than what I can't see. But here's the thing. One doesn't become a Christian by merely having a right set of beliefs. I know a lot of people who have a right set of beliefs but look nothing like Jesus, act nothing like Jesus. You know what the word Christian originally meant in the New Testament? It literally meant little Christ. Somebody who is kind of an icon, a moniker, looks like Jesus, acts like Jesus, thinks like Jesus, does like Jesus. You're not a Christian because of the right set of beliefs. You're a Christian because of the right person that you believe in, Christ, the death and burial and resurrection of Jesus. And maybe you walked away from God because at some point somebody told you to quit thinking and start believing. Quit asking all the questions you had. But here's the thing. Christian or science, God or science is a false alternative. I love what Richard Dawkins says. He says, one of the truly bad effects of religion is that it teaches us that it is a virtue to be satisfied with not understanding. To just kind of plug our ears and go, la, 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 God's got it. La, 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 faith, faith, faith. La, 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 I don't really care what science says. La, 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 just ignore it. This is the reason that a lot of people walk away from little g God. And this is the reason a lot of people want nothing to do with Christianity, because at some point your Sunday school God couldn't be reconciled with your adult faith. Your adult science. But if you're not a Christ follower, you consider yourself an atheist or agnostic, you're going to love this. I'm about to pick on Christians for a minute. Christians, we are hypocrites in this way when it comes to the whole faith, science, God, science thing. When your kids get sick, do you bring them to church? Do you bring them to the doctor? And listen, you bring them to the doctor right now, maybe you do the teledoc thing, you get on the phone, you call, and you tell the doctor this is what she's experiencing, this is what she's walking through. The doctors just come in, let's do some tests. You go, you take your kid in, you do the test, you go back home, you're waiting, you're patient, you're pacing back and forth, waiting on the phone. Finally, you pick up the phone, the doctor calls, the doctor says, look, we looked at the labs and we've concluded that God's trying to teach you something. It's not how it works, is it? We're hypocrites in this, that we lean into science for our health, but we often reject it on most other things, a broad list of other things. The anti-science God is a God that should be walked away from, because God's not afraid of science. God is not afraid of science. In fact, here's what I believe. I believe that science is just God's way of showing us how he does things. That's what I believe. Science is God. Science doesn't disprove God. If anything, science to me is a roadmap to God. Anyways, that's the anti-science God. It's a false alternative. The gap God. The gap God is this, last one. God conveniently shows up as an explanation for everything we can't currently explain. Many of you grew up with this kind of latent belief, and this is who God is. Here's what that looks like. You get a great parking spot at Target Christmas Eve, right up front. You got to shop and get the last thing. And as you're pulling in, you're just like, oh, praise to Jesus for this spot. Hashtag blessed. And meanwhile, there's a pregnant lady with 6 kids behind you, 5 spots back going, God must hate me. Yeah. We often look at what can't be explained. It's your wedding day and it's supposed to rain and then it doesn't. And you're like, oh, thank God. But the gal that's getting married a zip code over that the storm missed you, jumped onto her, is like, God hates me. God doesn't want anything to do with me. That whole thing of we're blessed, we're just blessed. Oh, our life's just great, we're just blessed. What does that mean? Does that mean somebody else whose life isn't great is cursed? See, when the gap God is the God of your life, it undermines faith in the real God. Here's why. Because the list of things we can't explain is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And you should be excited about that. Because the list of diseases that we can't cure should be getting shorter and shorter and shorter. Isn't that what we want? If it was your kid with one of those, wouldn't you want the list to get shorter and shorter and shorter? The list of things we can explain is getting longer and longer and longer. Wouldn't you want that for your kids? Wouldn't you want, as your kids grow up and progress and get older, for them to be able to explain more and learn more and grow more and grow more? God is not scared of our knowledge. God is not scared of our progression. God is not scared of us growing. In other words, unexplainable today may be explainable tomorrow. Therefore, unexplainable is not evidence for the existence of God. Unexplainable is not evidence for the existence of God. Unexplainable most of the time is evidence of our own ignorance. They used to not know, scientists have no idea how hummingbirds do their thing, It doesn't mean that because we can't explain it, well, there must be a God. Unexplainable today, they will figure it out. Unexplainable today may be explainable tomorrow. We're often for progress on the frontiers of medicine and health and diseases, but we often reject it everywhere else in the name of faith, and that undermines the very God that you're putting your faith in. And here's the truth. If everything were explained and explainable, it would not explain away God. That's just the truth. And we have got to stop being afraid of this as Christ followers. I know the whole line, the whole argument is if we know everything, that makes us God. That's not true. That if we know everything, that makes us God thing is the lie that the serpent told Adam and Eve in the very beginning. He told them, eat of this apple and you'll be like God and you'll know God and you'll know good from bad. That was the lie from the very beginning. Wouldn't you want your kids to get smarter and smarter and smarter? Wouldn't you want your kids to go further and further and further? Why would God want his kids to be stuck going, la, 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 I'm blessed, I'm blessed, I'm blessed. I can't explain it, it must be God. And it's fun and kind of like cultural commentary, but often it undermines faith itself. So, for this list that we're going to call the gods of the No Testament, because I just don't believe they're God. Bodyguard God, on-demand God, boyfriend God, guilt God, anti-science God, gap God. These are reasons. These are not reasons to not believe in God. They are unmet expectations that you had, that you placed on a childhood God, that you placed on a somebody told me so God. These are unmet and often unrealistic expectations that you placed on a God of your childhood. And you ask these gods to reconcile themselves with the God of your adulthood, with the God of your current situation, with the God of your divorce, with the God that's walking life with you in the midst of cancer. And these gods don't reconcile, and so it is easy to walk away from these gods. But I want to ask you, where did your view of the God that you struggle to believe in originate? Where did it start? Who told you that God was like that? Where did your view of the God that you quit believing in originate? Who told you that God said that he'd never let bad things happen to good people? Who told you that you'd always feel God? Who told you that God would meet all of your seemingly realistic expectations? That if you prayed for a job, that God would give you that job because he's good? Who told you it'd always work out like that? Who told you that God was anti-science and that faith and science were at odds with each other and you had to pick one or the other? Who told you that? It wasn't God. And it wasn't Scripture, and it wasn't the Bible, and maybe, just maybe, you had the wrong God. Maybe, just maybe, you're an atheist for all the right reasons, but directed towards all the wrong gods. So the obvious question, we started with it at the very beginning, right? So, if this is what God's not like, what's God like, right? John chapter 14 says this. Philip said, Lord, show us the Father and we'll be satisfied. In other words, Jesus, the boyfriend God's not doing it. He doesn't always come through. And the gap God is not doing it. Because I can explain more today than I did yesterday. All these gods aren't satisfying. All these things that I have been tempted to walk away from are not working. The God of the Pharisees and the Sadducees is not working. So show us the Father and we'll be satisfied. And Jesus replied, have I been with you all this time, Philip, and yet you still don't know who I am? Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. So why are you asking me to show him to you? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words I speak are not my own, but my Father who lives in me does his work through me. Just believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, or at least believe because of the work you have seen me done. So what's God like? God's like Jesus. You've seen him kneel down at the well with the woman who the town rejected because she'd been married 5 times and have a conversation with her and treat her with dignity? That's what God's like. You've seen him touch a leper who everybody else had run away from and love and heal and restore. That's what God's like. You've seen him go to a Roman soldier who was weeping because his daughter was dying, a Roman soldier who was an enemy of the Jewish people, and you've seen him have compassion on that Roman soldier and go and raise his daughter from the dead. That's what God's like. You've seen him say, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are the peacekeepers. Blessed are those who are mourning. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness. You've seen that. You've seen God. You've seen him go to the cross. You've seen him take the nails in his hands and his feet. You've seen him be humble as they place the crown of thorns on his head and jab a spear in his side. You see him not raise his hand, not raise a voice, not curse the people who would beat him and spit on him and mock him, but say, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. You've seen God. You've seen him do the impossible, the improbable, the undeniably miraculous, 3 days later, raised from the dead. You've seen him do that. You've seen God. God's like Jesus. God's not like the boyfriend. He's not the gap. He's not the anti-science. He's Jesus. And so if you've walked away from a little g God, good. I want to invite you to walk to the real deal. I want to invite you to take a step towards the real thing. You say, how do I do that? First, it's decision. It's just as you decided at some point to walk away from all these other gods, it's just at some point as you decided to deconvert from a version of what you thought was the real thing into something else. Well, you've doubted your faith. I want to challenge you to doubt your doubt. Where'd it come from? It probably came from a belief in a God that doesn't satisfy, and that's probably not even real. Jesus, on the other hand, the red letters in Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, that's God. And he says, come to me. Come to me. All you who are weary and need rest, and I'll give you rest for your soul. Can't get that anywhere else. Anywhere else. So would you bow your head and close your eyes and pray with me? I want to invite you to take a step today towards the real thing. I want to pray for you if that's you. If you, right now, wherever you're at, are deciding, God is like Jesus, that's what I want, that's what I need. Show me the Father, I'll be satisfied. Jesus, show me how to find fulfillment in you. Show me how to find peace and forgiveness in you. Jesus, show me how to find life in you. If that's you, I want to pray for you right now. Father, I pray for my friends. I pray for my friends who walked away at some point, deconstructed, deconverted, and left a God or a religion that looked kind of like you, smelled kind of like you, sounded kind of like you, but Jesus wasn't really you. Call her home today, Jesus. Call him back today. Not to the God of his childhood, but to you, the real, one true God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I thank you, Jesus, that you welcome us with open arms. Thank you, Jesus, you are faithful and true, that you are the same yesterday, today, and forever. I thank you that you are a friend that sticks closer than a brother. I thank you that you're the author and finisher of our faith. I thank you that you are slow to anger and rich in love. I thank you, God, that's what you're like, because that's the God I need. That's the God my friends need. So we take a step towards you today in Jesus' name. Hey, if you just made a decision to follow Jesus, or maybe you decided to follow Jesus at one point, but you've never been baptized and you want to take that next step, I want to invite you to grab your phone right now and text the word decision RO to 94000. Let us know. We want to pray with you and help you take your next step, whatever it is in your faith journey. We are so proud of you and so honored to walk this journey with you. And we'd love to pray with you and get to know you a little better. So text decision RO to 94000. We'll come along right side of you. Hey, if you're brand new, I'd love to meet you in our Next Steps room on the way out. Online, let us know you're new. We love you guys. Take a look at the screen before you go.
One of the most important questions you can answer is, who is God? And we want to help you answer that question. Here in just a few weeks, we are launching something new called Starting Point, and we want you to be a part of that and find out about the story that God is writing in your life. So whether you are part of Compass at home or whether you are here in person, I want you to get your phone out right now, scan this QR code right here, and sign up to go through Starting Point. Hey, we are super thankful that you are here and worshiping with us today, and so I hope you come back next week, invite a friend to worship with you, but I hope you have a great week, and we will see you next time.